So here we are and the system is broke. American dream has gone up in smoke. So stop sitting there all broken hearted. Let's get this motherfucking party started. Lady Liberty is ringing a bell, and we're driving us straight into hell. But don't worry, we got what you need. Crank up the volume till your eardrums bleed. Gonna make America again.
Welcome, everyone, to the A Better Way to a podcast. I'm your host, Jordan. We are currently waiting on Andrew because life is chaos. And today we are here with JB, our friend from the internet, who we've known for a few years. We met at Woodland Brutality the first time you and your friends were dressed as, I'm going to sound like such a boomer now because you just said who it was. And I was just going to say Fallout characters. People from that video game, Fallout. Yeah, JB is a school counselor and reached out to us after our Instagram post talking about ways to mitigate shootings without going through legislative means. And I appreciate you reaching out to me because I feel like this is a topic that doesn't get enough attention, especially from your perspective. And I think we're going to have a great conversation about it.
Yeah, it's I reached out because, like you mentioned, this is something that gets talked about a lot generally from folks who are only looking at it from one side of the perspective. And I think those sides are very arbitrary, honestly, like whether it's just a gun problem or whether it's definitely not the guns. Those are both pretty arbitrary. I have not heard from many people who have like feet in the shooting world and the education world and who care about both and who see the problems that go on in schools on a daily basis that are not nearly as flashy or newsworthy as like the horrific kind of violence behind a school shooting. So seeing a real absence of that kind of conversation, that kind of perspective, I was really excited to get to come on here and talk with you all about that. And hopefully that can give some people a little bit more insight. I think most folks outside of having their own kids in school now or their own memories of school don't necessarily have a good sense of what the schooling education system's like right now. Most folks who are primarily hearing just the worst things that go on in the news, whether that be like teacher malfeasance or school shootings, are also just not getting the full picture. And we know education's a really contentious subject right now. So it's, I just want to get this out there through whatever channels are available, and a good sympathetic source who's already on that beat of like, hey, we don't have to just defend guns at all costs. We can also present alternatives. And I think that's really valuable because it can be tempting to dig your heels in and just defend Second Amendment. And that is important, but not all the picture.
No, absolutely. And that's kind of, there's a multifaceted issue that has landed us in the position that we are right now, where the country is at everyone's throat. Politics are tribalized and people cannot have conversations about things that they disagree with. The gun rights debate and the gun control debate is no different. And I think part of the reason that we've ended up where we are now is because whenever somebody who comes from a good place, but maybe is ignorant on the subject of firearms or the legal system, says in their own special way, I want kids to stop dying in schools.
Yeah.
Gun owners en masse, their first reaction is to say, well, over my cold, dead body and from my cold, dead hands. And it doesn't get anywhere, and it only makes us look like assholes, because the loudest people are the ones who are going to get the attention, and the loudest ones are the ones saying things like, I heard something once, and while I understand where it's coming from and I agree, the way that it's worded, it does not lend any kind of possibility of reaching the other side. And the question was, how many kids have to die before you're willing to give up your guns? And the answer is all of them, because it's not about the guns. For people who understand the issue, it's not solely about the guns, because it's a very complicated topic. And it's like, no, well, not gun owners don't want kids to die, and they certainly don't want all of them to die, but it's a completely unrelated situation. So it doesn't matter how many would have to
Yeah.
it's a very hypothetical question, and I like I said, I don't think it's worded in a way that lends any kind of possibility for conversation. But
Yeah, the premise is, when will you agree with me? That's it.
yes, exactly. And let's face it, it comes from somebody who it comes from the perspective of somebody who is frustrated that their rights are constantly under attack by people who are not taking the time to understand the bigger picture. But at the same time, we have to give grace to people who are emotionally invested in this subject because they have kids in the school system
Yeah.
and don't necessarily want to take the years of time that we've had the luxury of taking because it's a part of a hobby that we enjoy and practice anyway, to get up to speed on the nuances of gun violence and school shootings and gun laws. And so, there needs to be way more meeting in the middle and meeting people where they're at, which there isn't. But that's why I think conversations like this are good.
For real, especially when there's such a deficit of things that need to be done that can tangibly improve the lives of students across the board for problems that are happening daily. And I should state right here early on, like I'm not going to name my school or district. I'm not speaking on behalf of my school. I'm not speaking on behalf of my district or any professional association. I'm speaking with professional knowledge in a personal capacity as someone who is deeply involved in education for about the last 13 years, as someone who's been involved in firearms from my birth, and as someone who has kids in the system right now, and as a counselor, as someone who sees the cumulative impact of all kinds of violence and strife and disruption in the daily lives of kiddos in ways that are just being ignored systemically across the board. Something that they've mentioned a few times in a few trainings that we do is that any given school in this country can expect a violent incident like a school shooting, which includes a neighborhood, once every 6,000 years. It's extremely rare, but when it happens, it makes the news, especially when it's large and when it's tragic. It's something that should never happen. We never want that to happen whatsoever. But putting all the focus on that really takes away from all the other work we can do, again, to make students' lives tangibly better in the meanwhile, in much less flashy ways that still mean maybe they finish high school feeling like they can do something with their life, feeling like maybe they have ways to feel safe, feeling that they have ways to manage their emotions, or ways to manage conflict, or ways to talk to other people, or ways to ask for help. And so much of this is just left behind because we've turned it into another one of the sordid cultural issues where it's either, guns are the problem, ban guns, or guns are not the problem, and also schools suck. Like, if you're sorting that way, how do you get much of anything done? And you don't. And what
Yeah.
we've seen, we don't.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's one of those things that oh, Andrew's here. Hi, buddy.
Let me just slide in stealthily. No one will know that I wasn't here.
Not at all. We won't call attention to it at all. Yeah, it's one of those things that it is such a polarized issue, and as a result, we don't get good solutions from either side, and we really don't get solutions at all because, like you said, yeah, we're at a point now where you've got one side saying ban guns, and the other side saying we need to abolish the Department of Education. And there's like how are either of these things going to marketably improve students' lives? I think we're so far from the root cause of the issues at this point because everything is so tribalized that we're so in the weeds right now. Nothing in these directions are going to solve the problems. In your experience, so you were saying that you are in an urban school, which obviously is a sample size, I would say, of the majority of America because it's probably a more diverse school than many.
You mean urban in the geographical way, not in the racist way, right?
No,
wait, definitely.
I'm totally sure she meant it in the racist way, Andrew, because that totally tracks with everything about us.
Is
Yeah.
that what I
No, we meant it in the rap music way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, city setting, we are like, I think my school is like 24% white, if that gives a sense of like our diversity. It's a super, super diverse school. Like, we reflect the demographics of the world overall way better than a lot of places. I think there's no particular group of folks that are more than 30% in our English school. So it's really diverse. It's very poor. We have about 92% free reduced school lunch. and most of our families are walking to school as well. So it's like I'm in the kind of school that gets ignored a lot, and I'm in the kind of school where we have a lot of pressure pushed on us, like outside perspectives are like, oh, that's probably where all the problems are because of poverty and everything else. But we see really directly the kinds of things that have an impact and the kinds of things that help our students and the kinds of things that they're dealing with stress wise that need more attention on them, and really don't have that as a possibility right now.
Yeah, there's how do you think we fix something like that? Let's like dive right into it. I mean, there's, like you said, schools like yours tend to be ignored, especially at a federal level. And
Yeah.
this seems to be a problem that garners federal attention, I'll say national attention, whenever a school shooting happens, obviously for good reason. But how do we, if we're coming at things from a root cause level and want to try to convince people to go this route, how do we convince people that we need to focus on making these kids' lives better, like demonstrably better, before we're going to see any kind of improvement in this situation?
Yeah. So there's, I think, a lot to that.
Yeah, sorry for the loaded question first off the bat.
Oh no, no worries. One of them is I think I mentioned this beforehand, but one of them is, again, like school shootings themselves are rare. They're also horrific. They should never happen. But basic daily violence, interpersonal violence, neighborhood violence, family violence, domestic violence, all of that is stuff that impacts students on the daily. And all of that really needs to be addressed because much of that does then lead to the kind of explosions of much more horrific violence that we see at times. We know that you can profile a school shooter. There's just no real consistency in who does it. There is consistency in media trends of when they choose to focus on something, and that's usually going to be body count, to be honest with you. We also know that there has been more internet radicalization happening in recent years as well. But in terms of when a school shooting happens, it's in a suburban school about like a third-ish of the time. It's in an urban setting school, so large cities, a bit less than a third, and then small town schools, rural schools, a little bit less than that. So it's not even something that, I guess that's part of my really big frustration here, is because a lot of the ways we're letting kids down are ignoring the students who most frequently face daily levels of violence and are less comfortable, but aren't overrepresented in these kinds of like school shooting kinds of violence, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
At a really basic level, if kids have reliable meals, if they know where they're going to sleep every night, if their family has support, and if they can actually spend time with adults that have time for them and that they trust and that they can talk with openly, that's going to handle so many of the problems that kids face daily. Reliable food, reliable shelter, reliable grown-ups.
Yeah, and that's kind of, you know, that stuff is based in so much data where you think that it would be common sense that that's where we have to start. You think that that's where it would be obvious that that's where we need to start. We need to figure out, we talk about this kind of stuff. Violent kids come from, for the most part, broken homes.
Well, they come from places they feel unwanted and unvalued, you know?
Yeah, and where do most kids spend most of their time? They're home, you know, and it's not just like, hey, my parents are divorced and I grew up relatively poor, so you know, I didn't turn out to be a school shooter, but it's a combination of different things. I grew up in a middle class area, so I had the resources available to me when my parents got divorced. I also had my dad in my life my whole childhood, even though my parents were divorced. So it's like, it's little things. I forget, Andrew, who was that guest that we had on? It was Miriam Abul Fazli, where she was talking about like serious traumatic events, and kids are like, it's normal to have a few, but when kids continue to have serious traumatic events that change the way they develop over the course of their adolescence, they're more likely to commit acts of violence.
Right. And I think that also we have to draw a distinction between like someone who becomes a school shooter probably didn't become a school shooter because their school didn't give them lunch. You know, the demographics of like who is a spree killer at a school is very different from like, you know, who might just be involved in like criminal activity or get in fights or just,
Yeah.
their grades suffer because they're exposed to violence at home or in their neighborhood.
Yeah, but I think no, I agree with you 100%. And I think what JB is saying is that by focusing on solutions that improve the lives of the majority of students whose needs are not met, you're also decreasing the likelihood that you're going to end up with, because it's, ideally you'd fix these problems nationwide, and the ripple effect from fixing those problems lowers the possibility that you're going to breed a school shooter eventually because the needs are met.
Well, kind of reduce the miasma of misery around these kids. And
raised level for everyone.
Yes.
Who may once have been in another universe a school shooter might be like, it's okay.
Just an awkward kid.
Yeah,
just an awkward kid.
Yeah.
And more to the point too, like raising that water level in a way that helps all students is just good. Because again, like there's the students at my school, they are facing types of violence in their neighborhood and homes and school daily that are not nearly as flashy as a school shooting, but those can all be things that are not inevitable. It does not have to be an inherent part of childhood to go through that. But we've chosen in a lot of ways to structure our society to make it that is going to happen more likely than not.
Imagine what that feels like to live in a home where like, and I'm not trying to like stereotype anything, but like, to live in a home where like the parents are struggling to provide for you, to live in a neighborhood where violence has become normalized because that's how people make a living. And then to go to school and then it's like, sorry, can't give you lunch because somebody thought that was unfair because he had to buy his kid lunch or something, It's like, what message is that sending you? What does that make you internalize about yourself and your place in the world?
Exactly. Yeah, there is it's from 2019 now, so it's a little bit dated, but there is a U.S. Secret Service analysis of school violence or targeted school violence, which is excellent. I would really recommend anyone look that up. It's all free to see online. But in their study case, they found that pretty much close to 100% of people who do violence in the school are experiencing home stress, some kind of disruption, some kind of violence in the home. And when I get to the thing about how you can't profile a school shooter, like any given school shooter, they're going to have things going on in their life that other kids are also dealing with and choosing not to react to with violence, or through whatever combination of supports they have, they don't get to the point where they're basically willing to die in order to inflict pain upon other people as a way of expressing like, this is all I can do at this point. But we have kids withdraw in other ways. We have kids withdraw in terms of eating disorders. I have third graders talk about needing to go on a diet, which just is heartbreaking. Kids will withdraw socially in other ways. They'll stop trying, they'll stop caring, they'll just go to media, they'll get into substances. There's all kinds of ways that like the violent outburst is one kind of response. The large scale violent outburst is a rarer version of it. But all of these factors are making kids' lives worse in so many ways on the daily, just inevitably. And that's what we really need to address. And in doing that, like I mentioned, hopefully we can turn on the temperature and also reduce larger bits of school violence too. But it really has to be addressed as this whole picture that doesn't just want to nip off the top worst possible outcome, but is really interested in raising the bar for everyone. So the baseline experience of being a kid in America is not where it is now.
Yeah. How do we get there? Because every time I've had this conversation with people, it's hard to approach and I would never do this, but a grieving parent. And I think if we're talking worst case scenario, the people that are put on the news specifically after things like school shootings are usually the parents, because the parents are going to garner the majority of the emotional response from the public. The public is who votes for the elected officials. The elected officials are the ones who write the laws. And I find it very difficult to tactfully broach the topic to point out that school shootings are the vast minority of gun violence. So to create an overarching law that only affects 0.001% of gun deaths doesn't make sense when we can do things like we've said in the past that will have a much broader effect and possibly, like you said, turn down the temperature on the possibility of school shootings happening. I find it hard to have that conversation with people And I don't necessarily think immediately after is the time to have that conversation, but that seems to be
Yeah.
when everybody wants to pass the laws. And I think it's,
Yep.
we
Yeah.
have to get better about having these ideas represented in a way where we're not made to look like crazy people, because we are also standing on the graves of children, because that's something that I do think that I have to get away from saying pro gun control and anti-gun people, but like people who are emotionally motivated tend to do is they point at the numbers. They point out like,
Mhm.
this was my kid, and it's a tough conversation to have with somebody who's upset, because it's a very emotional issue.
Yeah.
But we need to work on solutions that are going to have a much broader scale of effect than to pass laws that will affect such a small population of people and such a small percentage of the problem, that also are not always guaranteed to work. And that's something that we have to talk about, is like, yeah, you can pass a law tomorrow saying everybody has to lock up their guns because Adam Lanza stole their gun from their mom, which I think he knew the combination, which is like, that's the thing. Everyone has to lock up their guns. Well, who's to say the kid's not going to know the combination? This is why laws are not the solution. We need to worry about why the violence happens in the first place.
Well, in Texas here, if a minor, the law is that if a minor has access to your guns, so that means that if it's locked up, but they know how to get into it, like you taught them the combination or they know where the key is, you're still liable.
I think that's appropriate. Yeah, I feel like we've definitely talked about that before, and I think that's appropriate.
Yeah. I think free access is not a good idea for kids in general.
Yeah.
Like, my dad actually, I think only a couple, and I'm like 30 or 40 years old, and we don't need this. Point is, my dad just in the last year actually like gave me location and information on all of his safes and keys and stuff. And
Yeah.
I'm a fully grown woman.
Yeah.
It's just at the point where like, maybe if I pass away at some point, my kids should be able to access this stuff, is basically it. So I kind of come from that ground of like really, really high standards of, you as an owner of a firearm should be the one with sole access to it, unless you are supervising other people in use. But to kind of jump back to your question about how do you talk to folks, I think there's two extremes where my general response is I'm actually not going to engage. One of them is from the really compassionate side. So a grieving parent, a grieving teacher, school member. I can say all I want. This is vanishingly rare. But if it happens to you, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how rare it is, because it happened to you. You are grieving. You are mourning. You're going to feel whatever you feel. And I, as a mental health professional, it's not my job to try to tell you you're feeling wrong.
Right.
It is my job to try to encourage non-destructive ways of coping with it. But my job is not to persuade people who have lost family members that this isn't a course of action to take. I genuinely don't think there's much use in that. I think it's not compassionate. It's a little bit cruel. It's also turning someone's grief into, please don't use this against my interests. So I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
The flip side, this isn't even a flip side, it's like a whole alternate dimension, is like the school shootings are fake and they're staged in order to take our guns away.
Oh my God.
There's no point engaging that whatsoever.
Well, because we've talked about this before. I have this theory that like those people are not like necessarily cruel people trying to do damage. I feel like a lot of them just can't interface with a world where such awful things can just happen. And it's more comfortable for their minds and their souls to be like, no, it's fake. Those kids didn't die. That was faked.
Yeah.
And so you can't, it's like, don't talk somebody out of that. Just don't give it any airtime, but don't argue with somebody about that.
That's another thing with that long-term project of building up critical thinking and like social emotional skills can hopefully reduce the general level of folks who are willing to just believe that anything contrary to their preferences is fake or doesn't exist like that. But I think at the moment, on a practical reality, I'm not going to be able to argue with Alex Jones, and I'm not going to try to argue with any of the Parkland survivors or Sandy Hook survivors, because that's not my job. That's not really useful. And that's also kind of putting the focus in areas that are aside from that main mission of what can we do now for all students.
Exactly.
And the people that you want to convince about your viewpoint on guns and on social support are not in those groups necessarily.
Exactly.
Do you do active shooter drills in your school?
So one of the current protocols that's making its way around the country is the I Love You Guys Foundation. That was founded by a father whose daughter and some other students of their school were killed in a very, to be to be blunt, a very bizarre and upsetting version of a school shooting. It wasn't a student; it was an outside intruder who essentially took some students hostage and mistreated them, for to use a delicate term. And I think the last text that this dad got from his daughter was like, "I love you guys." So kind of named that after. So what his focus on in that foundation, he was going around giving a lot of talks on how to do a standard response protocol. So basically tiered systems of response to things. There is oh my gosh, now of course I'm forgetting, but there's secure, there's hold. So secure is we are inside the school, but business as usual. Hold is we are staying in our classrooms, so keeping the halls clear. Then there's lockdown, but it also includes shelter and evacuate. So one of the real big advantages of this is we have this set of things that schools can use, which is not just focused on how do you hold up against a violent intruder, which I really appreciate. So we have done those. And like the trauma informed, the nice way to do it is to give examples for all of these things that are likely to happen. So secure, why might we need to be inside the school? Well, it could be someone suspicious outside, could be a stray dog in the playground, could be there was a car crash on the street outside, could be there's a fire in the neighborhood. Lots of reasons for that. A hold, why might we need to stay in our classrooms? Could be students having a tough time, could be a service dog is running around, could be a spill in the hallway. And lockdown is the actual practice of wherever you are, again, don't run to your classroom, peanut in your classroom, but wherever you are, it's the hide, quiet, locked doors, lights off, all that sort of thing. And it's basically designed to add extra little bumps in the road to access. Something we know is that most school violent incidents are quite brief. The active threat is around for less than a minute or so. So anything to add extra barriers to that is good. And I will say as well, on the younger kid side, I will mention, like, in case there is someone who means harm, but we also say, like, imagine like there's an elephant in the hallway who really wants everyone's snacks. Like, how do you hide from the elephant so we can break through the door? Just ways to imagine things so they can practice the skill, not being unrealistic about it, but also we can practice this in a way where I emphasize it's likely not to be used, but if you need to know it, you got to use it. You want to be prepared, not scared, cautious, not fearful, all that stuff.
And it's so easy to traumatize your kids. You know, my wife's mom did this to her with the stranger danger stuff. And those scars stuck around for a long time. And we're trying to, you know, we've got a kid who's, you know, real spacey, and we're trying to teach him like safety, but like we want to do that without being like, you could be murdered in this parking lot if you don't get in the car right away. You know, you don't want to like put the fear in them. You want them to do the thing that they need to do quickly and safely, but you don't want to like ruin their childhood with these images of being like brutally murdered.
I like the elephant analogy because similarly, I have a 2.5-year-old, and I found that this girl, I mean, she's attached to my hip. She wants to be my best friend. I love it so much, but she's also a child, and she wants to play, and she wants to go, you know, explore and stuff. And I found the first time ever when we were outside once, and luckily we were in the backyard, but I got about 20 to 30 feet away from her because I was putting a ladder away, and she started running towards the woods. And there's nothing dangerous in the woods, like where we live. Nothing that wouldn't be apparent if there were, like a bear. And it was the fall, you could see into the woods. There were no bears, but I said her name and she didn't stop. And I said her name again, and I said her name and I said, stop. And she's looking back at me, like she acknowledges, she thinks we're playing, and she keeps going. And it was really a wake up call that like, we need to figure out a way to get her to listen to like a command when there's danger, but she's not going to be able to appreciate what danger is. And therefore not know that if she doesn't do this, that something bad can happen. So we started making it a game where I called it the freeze game, where it was like red light, green light. I said, honey, if daddy ever says freeze, you stop like you're frozen, like an icicle. And she loved it. She got a kick out of it. And every now and then, you know, every couple of weeks or so, I'll say her name and I'll say freeze. And she does it. She locks right up. But the thing is, I don't use that for things like, oh, I don't want her, you know, going to get a snack. I don't want her going to like get,
Yeah.
pull the toilet paper from the toilet paper roll. I only use
You
it
can't
when we're
misuse
either
it.
practicing. No, and I want her to know that we're either playing, because that's what she understands.
Yeah.
And if she thinks we're playing when there's apparent danger, that's fine too, because I also don't want to fuck her up. But as long as she listens, and that's, I think like, how do you explain to a kindergarten what a school shooter is without ruining their childhood? Like you said,
Yeah.
well, there's an elephant in the hallway who's going to steal your snacks, and it's sad that we have to have this kind of conversation, but it's really important. And I think that's another thing is, we talk about these school shooting drills, and I do think that they are good to have in the same way that we had fire drills growing up. A question that we are asked or we talk about often, though, is at what point, if any, do you think that school shooter drills may do more harm than good?
If it is focused more on the threat and less on the skill, I think that's pretty much it. If you are focusing on the fear aspect of it, I am 100% opposed to anything where cops come in and like simulate school shootings or whatever, or do the airsoft stuff, because that's just cops getting to act out a weird action movie fantasy, and it does not have any educational value whatsoever in my mind. It's not doing fear inoculation, it's not doing stress response. You're encouraging hypervigilance and exaggerating the level of threat. So
Yeah.
I think the drills, they inherently need to focus on the skill, and they need to include emphasis of the rarity, and they need to include an emphasis on, like, we don't have to be afraid when we know what to do. Basically, when I do safety lessons in general, like, you don't have to be afraid of a lighter. We just know we don't play with it. You don't have to be afraid of finding a knife. You just have to know what to do when you see one. And if we're prepared, we don't have to be scared. If we're careful, we don't have to be fearful.
I love that. And I feel like I feel like that's a great way to go about it. Our friend Kenny actually has a personal experience where a family member became irate with him, essentially blaming him. She's a teacher, blaming him for the reason they have to do school shooter drills, which are terrifying to her, because he is a gun owner. And I feel like there was a crossroads that when the school system or the school district or whoever puts this on reached it, they could have gone about this in a different way that didn't make her feel that way, because she's clearly scared. She clearly has an emotional response to it, which isn't invalidated if that's how she was made to feel.
Yeah.
I don't want my kid feeling that. If this is an adult who is, I've been trying to use this phrase more ever since Kyle Clark said it, a rational adult acting rationally to misinformation.
Yeah.
If that's this adult doing that, then I don't want my kid going through the same emotional roller coaster that is causing this adult to hurt their relationship with a family member because they're misinformed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because a kid will believe you. Kids are vulnerable. Kids are innocent. And if you tell them, this is scary because somebody with a gun can come in here and shoot all of you, that kid is going to go to school scared every day.
Like, why the fuck am I coming here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sense of proportion is not something we develop early on. And especially, again, with my kids, like, I have a decent number of kids who've lost family members to shootings, whether by police or by folks in the neighborhood or occasionally family members. So it's like, that's the other thing too. Like, the way we present it, there are always going to be a blend of kids, especially in certain areas where it's more real to them than others because they've seen it. And you can't put that back in the bottle. And you also got to respect and honor their experience in a way that helps. Contextualize is such a rough word to use right now, but in a way that helps respond to it compassionately and doesn't invalidate it, and also helps them move past the idea that this is just an inevitability of life. And there is a big problem, I think, in having like these culture sides so divorced, is that you do, I think, have a lot of people doing training on drills like this who don't have enough experience with firearms or context to the point where they are kind of just magical death weapons, for lack of a better term. Like, they can seem a lot, if they're scarier to an adult, how are they going to help kids understand them either? And like, I don't disclose firearms ownership to students ever, but I do answer questions in a way that uses my experience to not sensationalize things.
Right.
So, I mean, I mentioned kindergartners get the elephant thing. Older kids are going to ask all kinds of questions for the lockdown. Like, well, what if they use gas in the room? What if they knock out the windows? What if there's a bunch of people? And I'll be really real with them too. Like, well, if someone is determined to get through this door, they will. But it will be a delay. It will be time. And something that we do know in general is that folks who are on that desperate mindset are wanting to do the easiest thing possible. So we give a lot of examples towards that. And also, again, like being able to respond seriously to those, even when it's a mix of actual questions and just I'm trying to be goofy. But you got to take it seriously regardless. I think being able to respond with insight and context matters a lot.
Yeah, and I think that's super important. Being able to explain something in a non-sensationalized way that is like clearly, because I feel like kids have a bullshit detector. So when you try to like minimize something, you're trying to be like, oh, that's not a big deal. They're gonna be like, well, kind of seems like a big deal. Kind of seems like you're lying to me. And so to just like tell the honest truth, but in a way that's like, not, hand waving freakoutery.
Yeah.
And to have that relationship where you're respected as an authority because you're not going to be the only data stream. They're also getting social media, the internet, their friends' parents. You can control that.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you, this is actually something that we were talking about with one of our previous guests, Kyle. We were talking about how the reason the media reports on suicide the way that they do now is because they found that the more they report on certain things, the more likely they are to encourage certain things. Do you think that the practice of things like active shooter drills and the way that people are taken out of their day and forced to focus on something has any way an influence on other people doing that because they feel like they're not noticed by society, like they are not given attention, and knowing that this is going to be something that is going to get everyone in the school to pay attention to me because they're going to be forced to. Do you think there's any merit to something like that? Or do you think that if we do it in a way where we are, like you said, focusing on the skill and not the fear, that we can mitigate that sort of effect?
That's hard to say, honestly. It's like, obviously, in terms of like studies that cannot possibly be done ethically, that would be really high up there. Like we can't just check in a lot of schools and monitor how they do training and then, oh, this one got a shooting, this one didn't. It's hard to say. Like I do know, again, kind of what I mentioned earlier about all the different data streams that kids are getting. A sense of what's possible is like an accumulation of everything that you experience and hear. And if it is not unlikely that if you do repeatedly hear the sense of this is terrifying, can ruin your life, so you have to do it, like that is going to be more likely to be filed away as a possible route of action. And I think more of that comes from social media and peer groups than it does from schools. But one of the tough things about anything to do with public policy is we're talking statistics that manifest through individuals. We've got millions and millions of school kids. So if we can tweak some knobs to maybe statistically lower this, and this, that's probably worth it, even if we don't have hard data on like I've reduced violent incidents by 0.5% this year or whatever.
Yeah. No, I agree. And like you said, it's one of those things that it's hard to have a definitive answer for because we don't operate in a vacuum, and this isn't a lab setting. You can't conduct experiments like this without probably raising some ethical questions. But I guess another hypothetical question related to that: do you guys incorporate any sort of like run, hide, fight into your active shooter protocol, or is the escalation of action more for things like evacuation and not, like if somebody comes into this room, we're no longer hiding, we're no longer able to run? It's hard to have this conversation with kids that like,
to tell a kid they're gonna have to fight for their life.
It feels incredibly like I feel a very specific way about it, because as a dad, I can't imagine having this conversation with my kid. But
well, because you could probably prepare your kids to survive that situation by explaining that to them, but then also, that's a very small chance that they'll run into that. You could also just ruin their fucking life by traumatizing them about it.
Yeah. Because listen, we've all had the thought, how many kids could I take on if they were all to attack me? Like we've all thought this. Like I could take on 10 kids if they were one at a time.
Wait,
I could take on,
Wait, 6 10-year-olds or 10 6-year-olds?
Yeah, no, see, this is the thing. We all want to know. But really, if you think about it, if you've got middle school aged kids and a middle school aged assailant, whether he has a knife, a gun, whatever, it is very possible.
Start chucking desks at him. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Yes.
even, and this is like hypothetical Monday morning quarterback stuff. It's like, I understand why people do it, but what I've seen is teachers will hide kids in a corner of the room, all together in a corner of the room.
Oh, yeah.
And to me, that makes very little sense if your goal is to make it difficult for the person to harm you. And I think many of the examples that we've unfortunately found with this came before a lot of these schools had it in their repertoire to prepare for. So you really just you fall back on what you think is best. I'm certainly not faulting anyone for doing these things, but if you've got 15 of your peers waiting by a door and you walk into that room and you have 15 of these peers, start manhandling you, it's going to be very difficult to continue doing what you're doing. And that's why I ask, is that ever a topic of conversation that comes up when talking about these types of situations, or
With the kids specifically?
yeah, is that beyond the purview?
No, it is, because the run, hide, fight things, that like model specifically is not something we talk about, but inherent to the current standard response protocol is both run and hide. It also recommends, like, again, all rooms in a school are locked by default. So there's that base level of hide out of sight of the hallway in order that any given room should appear to be equally empty. So it kind of confuses that space there. It puts a delay on access to any given room. It just is a set of roadblocks while we wait for a response. Being in an urban school setting, we have cops response time is way faster than it is in some places. The fight side, I do not bring that up, but I will always respond to that when kiddos ask. And generally, third grade on up, they will ask. I imagine, I think a lot of people as kids have some kind of fantasy of saving their class, whether that's, they could use their Jedi powers or their lightsaber, or whether it's like actually, I'm going to tackle this person or whatever. It's a delicate balance to get, but I'll have like sixth graders say like, "Oh, can I like throw a stapler at him?" And I'm like, well, I mean, if someone is in the room at that point, it's whatever you need to do in order to try to stop, that is okay. And they're all like, "Whoa, really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah." It's like, it's not fantasize about it. Like, you're not going to run out of the room to be a hero, but if someone meaning harm enters the room, then by all means, you do not have to be polite to them. You do not have to be gentle with them.
Yeah.
Whatever you think to do, that's fine. And for the run side, they do emphasize as well, and this is something that we get in safety, is we would much rather have to find you in the neighborhood alive than find you in the classroom not alive, basically. So we'll say, if we call this and you're outside and you can run to your house, go for it. If you can realistically just book it, and if that's what your family says to do and you can get to your house and get in there, then go for it. Like, genuinely. We emphasize that we're all in this together, and also if you have an avenue of escape, go for it. We'll find you eventually. That's fine. We would much rather do that than anything else. So I think that kind of answers that.
No, absolutely.
Because so you don't want to encourage the kids to like think about like fighting maybe not even necessarily a school shooter, but somebody that's not supposed to be there. But if that's something that they're already thinking about, you want to answer those questions honestly. I do feel like some of these kids do have kind of like a natural like instinct for protectiveness, and every kid's like capacity for violence is a little bit different. But you definitely don't want to like stoke the fire as a violent fantasy.
Yeah, there is no school militia.
Yeah.
No. I think it is good that you put it in terms that they can understand, though, and say things like, you don't have to be polite. You can do whatever you have to do, because I think people have unrealistic expectations of what is expected of them and what they are allowed to do. Especially as a kid, you don't know what you're allowed to do, and to be told by an authority figure, hey, if this is the situation, and you can run, and you could run away to your house, or you can, if you have to, you can hurt the person. Do whatever you have to do. I think that sets them up to not have those mental blocks if the time ever unfortunately comes. But like, even as adults, like I think as a guy, I think I can land a plane. It's just something I think about whenever I go on a plane.
No,
I could totally land this if I had to.
Not. I know I cannot.
I play Microsoft Flight Simulator. I could do it. Do I want to? No, I never want to be put in that position. But if somebody was like, please, does anybody have Microsoft Flight Sim experience on this plane, I'd be like, my time has come.
I could land a plane if the situation is the pilot and co-pilot are there, but their hands have fallen off and they just need someone to like push buttons. And they're there and they can like point with their nose to things that I need to do. Then yeah, I can probably manage.
They could point with their nose. You
Yeah.
assume they're mute also?
Well, no, because they don't have like, you know, the stump is too much of a
Yeah, listen, you're gonna have to be more specific, sir.
but you want to put like you want to tape like a pencil to their nose so that they can do like a fine point, you know, because there's a lot of
Yeah.
buttons
Yeah.
that if they just gesture broadly. Anyways.
Anyway.
But
It's okay. We would do one tangent.
yeah.
Yeah, that's relevant though, because I think that a key part of that is like what skills are broadly applicable enough that everyone should know how to do them versus what is over preparing because you're imagining every
Sure.
possible scenario. Should the average prepared citizen know like how to navigate without Google Maps? Yeah,
Yeah.
probably. Should someone who's carrying concealed like be able to have a rapid draw, get hits on target at like 10 yards? Yes. Should a concealed carry holder need to frequently practice escaping from bindings at the bottom of the pool and then drawing and like exfiltrating a whatever? Like, no, probably
No,
not.
that's just a
Like,
brutality
do
match.
kids need to learn how to weaponize? There you go. Do
Yeah.
kids need to learn how to weaponize a pencil or a desk? Probably not.
What I feel like simple weapons are like instinctual. You know, I feel like every human is born with a certain level of capability for that.
Well, what did you say? You said you've never shown your son a gun in his life, and what did he do with a
Oh my
stick shaped
God,
like a
dude.
gun? He started pointing it at people.
Yeah, this kid is like hardwired for it. I swear to God,
Not for school shootings.
no, he's such a sweet kid, but I feel like he's got this like dual nature where he's like, you know, he's sweet and protective and just this beautiful soul, and then he's like, you know, has these like bursts of like violence. You know, not like real brutal violence, but like, you know, I don't know. He's just and like we were at a birthday party. This is tangent time. We were at a birthday party for one of his school friends, and some kids that weren't there for the party had knocked over this little girl and were kicking her in the head.
What?
And, yeah, and
Jeez.
I would say this was like a play gym place, you know. So there's like, you know, it's like leaps and bounds or whatever. And I wasn't there, but one of the other moms in the class was there and saw run in there and try to like get in between them and like, you know, push the bigger boys off of this little girl. And she just ran in there and grabbed him, hoisted him out of there before he got his ass kicked. But like, you know, it just makes me think about like, you know, what he would do in these like situations, because he's always talking about like, you know, I'll protect you guys, don't worry. And I'm like, where are you getting this from? I don't talk to him like this. I don't talk to him about like violence and like protecting your family and stuff like that. He's just fucking plucked it out of the ether from like, I don't know, media or overheard conversations or something.
Some kids do.
Yeah. Anyways,
I wish my wife would say that to me more whenever I bring up something completely unrelated to our
like,
conversation.
no, that's relevant.
That's relevant, and just not elaborate further. Just
I'm not bored.
It is though, honestly.
Yeah.
I think that just gets to where kids are getting stuff from the ether. Like, where are they getting it? Like you said, you don't even really know necessarily. So you're never going to be able to control all of what goes into a kid's like sense of what's possible and what's likely.
Yeah.
All you can do is like meet it where it's at and try to help steer it in a good direction, which sounds like you're doing.
God, I hope so.
Andrew's a good dad. I know he is because I'm constantly waiting for him because he's playing with his kids.
Yeah, I'm always late.
He's at the bare minimum a distracted dad, but distracted by his kids.
Because we're always recording like right around like nap time, so I gotta like put one of the kids out for a nap. They're trying to get ready to my wife and the sitter are gonna go to a birthday party for one of his classmates, and so I was trying to get some stuff, you know, snack bags, diaper bag put together before I came in here.
Yeah, JB, this is something that I wanted to ask you in your role, because obviously we talk about how things would be perfect if we had recognition on a federal level, if we had people realizing that root cause mitigation is the way to prevent gun violence, but at your level as a school counselor, what can school counselors do to improve kids' lives in a way that would mitigate violence in general? Because gun violence is just part of that.
Absolutely. So we are Ideally part of a whole team. Nationally, the School Counselor Association, or ASCA, American School Counselor Association, they recommend one counselor for every 250 kids. I have quite a few more than that. Some states have an average of like 450 per counselor. So it's tough. It's tough. I will take a quick tangent before there to say, like, ideally, we're part of a big support network. Schools are kind of made to be every social service in one very consistently, especially in urban settings. So we have like basic healthcare, basic food providing, connections to housing resources, job resources for parents, often food pantries for families as well. And specifically, what our professional mandate is as a counselor is that social emotional side of things. I know that's been in the crosshairs recently as like, I think there was an attempt for a little while to make SEL what ended up, they just used DEI as the target instead.
Yeah,
I
of course.
heard a lot of rumblings about, oh, SEL is this horrible thing. Social emotional learning, it's just literally the parts of being a person that aren't academic. How do you solve problems? It's how do you not like someone and still cooperate with them? It's how do you deal with your emotions? It's
Yeah.
who do you ask for help?
People will say like, "Oh, that's the parents' job to teach them," and then not teach their kids that. So,
yeah.
like, maybe we need professionals.
I have so many kids who their parents, like whether they have one or two parents in the home, like through no real fault of their parents, they're working 2 or 3 jobs. Maybe they work off schedule from their kids. So maybe the kids wake up, a breakfast was prepared for them by their parent who's getting their 4 hours of sleep that day. They get home, they're like a latchkey kid by themselves. They maybe see a parent for like an hour or so. Like we can complain about iPad kids and TV as babysitter all the time all we want, but like when you're exhausted and you're doing everything you can just to keep a roof over your head and keep your
Oh, yeah.
kids fed, like what choice do you have?
Yeah.
I don't even have it that bad, and I've
Yeah.
definitely had like, all right, we're gonna turn on Blippi for an hour, and I'm gonna get some.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
Yeah.
honestly, like, and there is a lot that needs to be done broadly in that. So like the basic messaging, like having, it's exhausting to do, but having actual oversight over what your kids are watching is important too. Because I've had so many second graders who will just love watching like movie gore compilations on YouTube, or like an 8-year-old who said, "Oh, my favorite horror movie is Terrifier," because they just get unlimited access to streaming or
Oh
whatever
my
else like
god,
that. Like
no, dude.
it's all over the place.
Yeah.
And the thing, and the worst thing of that is like YouTube Shorts or anything algorithmic, which is
It's just going to show you more of it.
Yeah.
yeah, 6th graders quoting Andrew Tate, 5th graders quoting Jordan Peterson.
And like for any parents listening, kudos to
Mhm.
YouTube. They did put out an app where you can disable autoplay. It's YouTube Kids. It's a separate app. There's
Yeah.
no ads. You can set like pretty detailed parental controls. So please look into that.
Mhm.
If you've got kids and you're listening to this and they're on the YouTube app, get them off of it. Please put them on YouTube Kids. Thank you. That's all.
And especially if you can whitelist some channels, because there's so much like algo pleasing slop on there too. It's pretty upsetting. But to the counselor thing,
Yeah.
we in many cases are functionally kind of a band-aid, but I think the core focus of our role is that tier 1, so like whole school social emotional learning, and then specifically they're trying to move us towards facilitating that. So homeroom teachers are doing a lot of that.
Can you explain what that is for people who don't know what it is?
So there's this tons of acronyms in education. One is MTSS, which is multi-tiered systems of support. And tier 1 is basically what does the entire school get? What does every student get? Tier 2 is going to be more smaller group focus, whether that is pullouts for accelerated learning or concentration on social skills or reading catch up or math or whatever. And then tier 3 is individualized support. Again, whether that be like special behavioral plans or whether that be like a solo independent project because the student is just so advanced they really need that extra help, right? So we talk about tier 1, the whole school is getting it. Ideally, about 20% of students are on tier 2 and like 1 to 5% are on tier 3. So one of our professional mandates is that tier 1 side of things. And we also dip into the small groups and hire things as needed. I spend a lot more of my time than other counselors doing individual and small group responsive services, which is fundamentally, I'd say if there's a takeaway from all of this, it's fundamentally hearing kids out, building supportive relationships with them, giving them an avenue to express themselves and talk about difficult things, and being another trusted adult in their wheelhouse. We do a lot of skill focus as well. So if there is a student who perpetually or like is really prone to spiraling in thoughts, like going from, oh, that person looked at me to, oh, that person hates me, to, oh, that person's trying to ruin my life, to that person's evil, like stuff like that, you know? So in terms of like lowering the temperature on school violence, we want to be part of an overall team, and we want to be the kind of person to give kids who maybe do not have many adults in their life who are going to listen or treat them like a human being to have that. And that's where a lot of my focus is. And I think that's going back to the numbers we have on students who feel like they're alone or left out. That is one of the best things that we can do to help with all kinds of violence and feeling left out and all of the other problems that come with feeling like nobody gets me, nobody cares about me.
Yeah. That's incredibly important, because like you were saying, if these kids don't have a reliable adult at home for whatever reason to give them that feeling, they need that feeling from someone.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a terrible childhood, and I had both my parents in my life, even if they were divorced. But there were certainly times, even at that, like I grew up with an alcoholic mother, at times neglectful, but always hardworking. She always went to work, and that's where the majority were drinking. But that was just, she always provided when she could. And I had a dad who did the same, but there were still at times where I felt alone, and I felt that I didn't have a good influence in my life. And it's funny, I can say that stuff now. At the time, I didn't think that. I didn't realize that's what it was. And at those times, I felt like I was more connected to certain teachers and more connected to, I didn't really have a relationship with my guidance counselor.
Yeah.
We had school counselors, but I didn't really have, I'm wrong. In middle school, I saw the school counselor once a week, because that's when my parents were going through the divorce. So that's really interesting. I totally forgot about that. But during those times, I felt like I had closer relationships to my teachers at those times, certain teachers at those times, who I felt were available, who could talk about things, and being able to have somebody else take up the slack when I needed them to probably did way more than I realized for me as a growing kid. And
Yeah.
I know that I was one of the fortunate ones who was able to get that. And I know there are so many people who have a significantly worse home life as well and need more of that. And the first time I heard of social emotional learning, I think, was actually when somebody was criticizing it.
Yeah.
Because they didn't understand what it was, and they were calling it like probably some woke bullshit or whatever.
Well, because it's like these conservative, and I am singling out social conservatives here because this is mainly who I hear this from. They have this idea of like a professional teaching their kids these things is like predatory, that they're taking responsibility that should be theirs and like subverting the family unit. But it's like, we wouldn't have to do this if like you weren't so fucking traumatized that you couldn't do it yourself.
Well, and also to piggyback on that, if you were already doing this, hearing it again from a teacher or a social worker is not going to hurt, because it's something that they're going to say. If I go and say, hey, like, one thing that we want to teach my daughter is like there are good strangers and there are bad strangers, and not just do the whole stranger danger thing, because if she ever needs help and we're not around for whatever reason, I want her to know she can go to, unfortunately, cops. Like, cops are a good stranger in this situation to a kid, but like cops, your teachers, firefighters, people like that, and little things like, a stranger is never going to ask you for help with anything. Like they're never going to need your help for a problem. And she's too young to understand that stuff now. But I totally forgot where I was going.
Talking about things that you should be teaching your kids.
Yeah. Thank you. So if I'm teaching my kid a coping skill, and they go then to school, and their guidance counselor, their school counselor, their teacher says, hey, when we feel these feelings, this is what I want you to do instead of this. Instead of, Johnny felt like he had to punch a wall when he did that. And we're going to learn how to recognize that we're feeling angry and how to process that anger. If I already taught my kid that, I don't care if they're hearing it again. The problem comes from people parroting misinformation and not understanding what a program does, and then coming up with preconceived notions about that program based on their biases, based on their internalized biases. And I think a lot of that, it's exactly what happened with DEI. It's exactly what happens with social emotional learning. I find in the times that I've seen people criticize it, because they think exactly, they're going to teach my kid to be woke. Like, no, they're just going to teach your kid not to grow to be an abusive spouse because they don't know how to contain themselves and express their feelings effectively. Like that's
Yeah.
ultimately what it is it's teaching kids how to process emotions and how to treat other people and how to feel empathy.
I think there is a pretty significant subset of the population who believes that your kid's purpose is to pass your exact values onto grandkids for you.
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of it comes from.
Oops.
It's like, I need to have control over my kids.
Yeah.
And it is unfortunate because, like, again, so many things to do. Like, if you are able to have a conversation with someone you disagree with, if you are able to respond to conflict in a healthy way, that is ultimately going to really moderate a lot of other things later in life.
Yeah.
That's just kind of how it goes. But like, I've had kids in my room who will tell me like, oh yeah, I just don't agree with this or this. And like, you were describing my home life, but in this moment, I'm here to listen to you. I'm not actually here to like deprogram you from your whatever upbringing. I'm here to support you in the ways I can. Like, I wish I could just flat like match the minds of everyone who's like, oh, they're transing the kids and woking the kids. Like,
Yeah.
you have no idea how far away from the truth that is. I do want to mention this another number that's helpful in terms of like a supportive adult. Number I really always feel pretty strongly about is we know that trans kids have a pretty disproportionately high rate of attempted suicide.
Yes.
We also know that number drops to basically baseline for age level if there is just one supportive adult in their life who is consistently there for them to listen. And that is so telling to me. Like, kids need at least one outlet. They need at least one space to be heard as a human who is worthy of being taken seriously. And it's not just trans kids, but it is important.
I love that statistic about trans kids that you just mentioned, because we're not talking about like radically changing society to benefit trans people. You know, all we're asking is that you stop treating them like shit and that they can have like one person to talk to that's not judgmental, you know?
Yeah.
And that's, you know, like that's not a lot, you know, that's not a lot to ask for.
But yeah. And I could do a whole tangent on that as well.
Do you want to?
I do want to get into the post you had made about the things to prevent violence. I just want to say like access to medical care and not conversion therapy.
Yes.
And all that stuff is super important. Like, just treat people as even kids can be the experts on their own lives. It doesn't mean you get to decide your entire sleeping schedule and meal schedule, obviously. But if you are sincerely experiencing a certain range of feelings and senses, then yeah, let's explore that. Let's make sure you're supported through that. That's really important to me.
There's like such a skewed perception of like what it is that like a trans kid can ask for and get with like no resistance at all. Like I've talked to people that think that like a 10-year-old trans kid can be like, please do invasive surgery right now or I'll kill myself. And like there's doctors tripping over themselves to do that. And like, and it's just the experience that I've actually had talking to people who are trans and were once kids. That's not how it is.
Not remotely. No.
You know, it's just really, like you said, like all they need is some support, system, you know, to have access to a doctor who doesn't, you know,
immediately invalidate them. Yeah.
To have access to an adult who can, you know, talk them through these issues. It's just so frustrating. I don't have to explain that to you. I know that, you know.
Yeah. And there's like puberty blockers have been used for decades for kids experiencing precocious puberty. And I always really need to mention again, like transition for younger kids, it's different haircut, different clothes, maybe a different name. And that is all being specifically targeted right now. Like there's just a lot of legislation about protecting teachers getting to dead name kids. It's really garbage.
And I always have to remind people that so many trans kids stop at different hair, different name, you know. It's not, you know, it's just there's like this huge spectrum of like, you know, where kids end up on the treatment. Yeah. And again, like I'm talking to the audience, I'm screaming at the universe here. I know everybody here is like on the same page about this stuff.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, we've got a litany of different viewers, and I'm sure everybody falls like different, you know, different. Us three in the room agree on this, but it's one of those things that, you know, we talk about it, being a supportive parent or being a supportive adult nets you so much benefit that people don't realize. And like you said, being a supportive person in a kid's life doesn't mean you get to go to sleep whenever you want and do whatever you want. because I'm being supportive and I'm
Yeah.
acknowledging you. Sometimes it could be, pushing back, but then in an intelligent and an emotionally intelligent way, gauging whether or not something is a need for your child or something's an interest, or if something is like, hey, is this going to make your life better? Or is this something that you just want to know more about? These are questions that they're qualifying questions that show your interest. And I think engaging in ways like that, already you're going to affect your child in ways that you could never even imagine, without even saying, okay, great, we're going to send you to a surgeon tomorrow, and do everything that the media thinks that we're going to be doing.
And like, speaking to parents here, as a parent, there is nothing predatory about an authority figure at school listening to your kids' issues, listening to your kids' concerns, giving honest feedback, and just telling the truth.
The problem comes from this fear that things are happening at school that parents are unaware of. And like, if you think about it, you follow it to the root cause of every parent's fear. Is my kid going to get molested? Is my kid going to get, sexually taken advantage of or kidnapped? That's been the root cause of every parent's fear forever. Like, that's throughout history.
Oh yeah.
And with the way that people are demonized in media, specifically the trans community, there's an overlap of people who are malintentioned bad actors. And then there are also people who are just ignorant and concerned. And the vast majority of people, I think, are ignorant and concerned. And that's why, we need to have these conversations that, like, hey, having things like social emotional learning, having things like school counselors who listen to your kids and then make recommendations to the parents, for then the parents to go and make medical decisions or psychiatric decisions.
And this isn't black magic stuff. This is the data-driven approach that find documentation for.
Yes, things like that are objectively good. You can decide what you want to do with that information. But having the resources available to give you the correct information so that then you can go make an educated decision with your child is important. And what people seem to want to do is get rid of all the resources, get rid of everything even related to the resources.
So the kid never hears anything but what you have to say. Yeah,
exactly. And that's, I think breaking that stigma down that, like, hey, more resources are good. And getting the most information that you can possibly get so that you can go make an informed choice is what the majority of people want. The majority of teachers want. Of course, there's always going to be somebody who's going to cherry pick some fucking weird teacher who's like teaching something completely inappropriate to their kids that was immediately disciplined for because the faculty found out about it.
My literal nightmare. I found one example in all of history.
Yeah. But in the grand scheme of whatever the problem is, whether it's emotional problems with your kids, whether it's financial problems, whether it's I can't figure out how to get my car to start, you would always say, I want as much information as possible. I want to learn as much as possible. I want the tools that are going to be most appropriate for me to use at my disposal. But for some reason, there's a disconnect when it comes to emotional tools for your children to use. Because it's politicized.
It really is. And that gets to that this does keep on connecting back to where we're putting the focus on things, because obviously the targeted identity is complete garbage. That's just not a thing. We know very consistently the adults most likely to harm kids are going to be family members or trusted adults outside of school. We just know that for a fact. It's not random.
Yeah.
And if people are like teachers who have died here or whatever. But that gets to be a focus because it's distracting, it's convenient, it's a small enough minority that can be used as a punching bag, and that kind of makes everything a little bit easier.
There's that, and then there's also, it's like, okay, so if my deep fear in my heart of hearts is that someone is going to mistreat my child and traumatize them, it's very difficult for me to interface with the idea that more than likely that's going to be me or my brother, like somebody that I was raised to trust and deeply care about. It's very difficult for religious people to truly understand the gravity of the problem with the Catholic Church and child molestation. It's like, to accept that statistical fact is to then question, your own place in this problem. I think that most of these people are not secretly time bombs of trauma waiting to explode, but I think it's just that's part of the reason why it's so hard for them to really accept the truth of where this kind of trauma comes from.
Yeah. No, absolutely. You're going to be going primarily focused on whatever is most visible, whether it deserves to be so or otherwise.
Yeah.
I think if it's all right, I think that seems like a good segue to your post about things that help in schools,
Yeah.
talking about the big picture. I really did like that post, again, talking about 8 evidence-based actions we can take. And the thing I really liked about that as well is, again, all of those are things that would be good and helpful if school shootings weren't an issue. Like, we should be doing these things anyway.
Yeah.
So the threat assessment programs, one of the current models that's going around is called CSTAG, or Comprehensive School Threat Assessment Guidelines. I really like it. It's really detailed. It goes into a lot of factors. That's a really good policy. One of the things that I hear about a lot when talking to folks is that they had a bad experience with like zero tolerance stuff, which I completely agree with. Like, we have a couple of outlier examples, like a kid bites a fig Newton in the shape of a gun and goes pew pew, and that's a disciplinary thing, right? I think the core of the CSTAG process, so Comprehensive School Threat Assessment Guidelines, is it's attempts to resolve things as like a transient threat. Like, was this kid just a little bit heightened in the moment? They say like, "Oh, I'm going to kill you," because they were really mad in that moment. Or there's also the serious substantive threat side of things, which is basically was intent behind this threat. It is likely to be the student will make an effort to carry it out, or there's reason to believe that this is more serious than just a heated moment, basically. And then there's a lot more details about it. Really takes into account a lot of other factors in a student's life. So what's their home life like? What stressors are they under? What supports do they have? It goes through this whole checklist of things, a lot of which show up on things like that Secret Service report I talked about earlier, in order to determine like what factors are operative in a kid's life. And that can lead to recommendations for other courses of action too, which is a whole spectrum, from just contacting parents to contacting law enforcement in an extreme situation or other stuff like that. So one of the really big advantages of this is it provides a structured, very evidence-backed way to like determine, okay, when do we need more resources versus when is this like a developmentally normal outburst, basically. And I've been one of the primary threat assessor people at my school, and it's a really good process.
That sounds like hyper reasonable.
Yeah, hyper reasonable, hyper normal. Well, think about any other problem. Like, I understand why the zero tolerance policy was implemented. It was because people needed a way to control possibly dangerous situations without having the resources, probably at the time, or the knowledge to fully detail, like, to understand them.
Yeah.
So somebody says, somebody beats somebody up. It's like, well, we can't spend the time to figure out whether or not they were in self-defense, or if, why the physical altercation happened. So we're just suspending both parties. That's not the proper way to do things, because if you were in any other aspect of your life, you don't have zero tolerance policies for most things in adult life, with the exception of violence against yourself or whatever. But
I also learned that zero tolerance is not zero tolerance for everybody, because I accidentally around Halloween brought a toy gun to school, and I was like, I was such a fucking little authoritarian. I narked on myself. I was like, teacher, I'm so sorry, because I knew all this stuff about like school shootings and everything, and nobody had really like had an actual conversation with me about it. I was just interpreting it myself, and so I was like, teacher, I accidentally brought this to school. I didn't mean to. What's going to happen to me? And she was like, don't show that to me. Put that away. Just keep it hidden and don't do it again. And I was like, oh, so I'm not going to go to jail. And everything was fine and nothing happened to me. But I know for a fucking fact that, there were other kids that were getting in trouble for this stuff. Toy guns, drawings of guns, finger guns. And I don't remember being aware of it, but in my memory, at least one of those kids was a black kid.
Well, but it also probably depends on the public appearance of it.
Yeah.
The fact that you said it to her in confidence and nobody else saw it.
Sure.
If a kid is going out and, pointing fake guns at people, and it's almost like a societal or like a professional pressure to react.
Sure. But the point is that zero tolerance isn't zero tolerance. There is discretion with how it's applied.
Yes.
Yes. And that means that at some point prejudice will play a role in it.
Yeah. No, 100%. Just in terms of who gets reported on. I will say, like, one of the really huge downside, well, there's lots of downsides of the zero tolerance approach, but fundamentally, Out of school suspension and expulsion are always bad. Like they're always a negative impact on the student. Having to leave your learning environment, it's bad. It's just not good. And if a student in whatever way was acting in a way, like they're probably getting influences from outside of school that impacted that. So you're not going to be in school for a week. That's just yielding any responsibility to do stuff with it. We had a couple transfers lately who, I can anonymize this pretty well, who basically have expressed surprise that they have not been suspended yet. It's like, well, I thought I was the bad kid. It's like, well, we don't do things that way here. If we need to, for safety reasons, we'll maybe walk certain students home or like have some alternate plans, like you're going to do your work in this room instead today, or shift classrooms. But out of school suspension, expulsion just don't help anyone. The one trick of that, and part of why this threat assessment thing matters a lot, is because learning environment of other students is also impacted. So if you want to do least restrictive environment, if you want to know that every given student has the right to a full education, that also includes trying to balance as much as possible learning environment for all other students as well. And we can't just give up on some kids who are consistently disruptive because they're consistently disruptive, but we do need to really address other things in their life that are leading to them acting that way.
Yeah.
And that's something, again, that this helps with, whether that's finding extra services or other outlets for kiddos. There's a lot we can do.
Like you're intentionally using the word kiddo, like you said it 3 or 4 times now, and it's a word that I haven't used in a while, but definitely I'm going to start calling my kid a kiddo. And she's at the age where she's going to be like, "You said kiddo," and she'll be like, "What's kiddo?" Yeah.
I've definitely learned too in my own like personal parenting that like I've learned how ineffective like punitive approaches really are with kids. Yeah. Which was surprising to me because that's all that I really ever knew as a child. But
yeah,
so that's always my
go to your
instinct, but we're working on it. And you can see pretty clearly and easily how different the results are in your kid's emotional state and the behavioral results that you get.
Exactly. Are you teaching them to do the right thing, or are you teaching them not to get caught?
Yeah, right.
Big difference. And I think most of us who grew up with any kind of parental strife at home, we primarily learned not to get caught or not to be seen. And that doesn't actually help you develop like good relationship skills.
No. I wish it was possible for me to show my parents how my daughter, I mean, assuming she does, how my daughter raises her kids as a result of our parenting.
Yeah.
Because it's something that we've had to have these kind of conversations with them multiple times over, because, we'll say like we're setting boundaries. My dad actually told me, "Oh, you don't set boundaries with parents." And I said, "This explains a lot, Dad, but no, we absolutely do here." And like also when she's old enough to be able to articulate what that is, she's welcome to set boundaries, reasonable boundaries, like with us. Yeah. She can't say like, we're never allowed in her room ever. Yeah. But like, if she says like, "Hey, I want to be alone right now," we have to respect that.
100%.
And things like that.
100%.
And, that's something that I never had growing up. And as a result, even as early as late as like when I started dating my wife, my mom would just come into my room. My room was in the basement. And she would just come down and start talking. And, back when she was drinking, she'd steal booze from my mini fridge. This is like, it's so funny saying this because it was so long ago, but like my wife would just be like, "Oh, hey, hey," like no boundaries here. But I think, setting that up and showing how these kind of approaches to handle problems that kids are facing now is, like I said, it is going to be, it's a root cause solution, and it's not something that we're going to see overnight, but I think it's something that a generation down the road or 2 generations down the road, we're going to see marketable differences as a result of the actions that we're taking today.
Yeah.
It's treating kids as people instead of property. Basically, that's the movement we're trying to
big thing
for. And I know that where a lot of the pushback against schools comes from. It's like, you are mistreating my property is kind of what the subtext of a lot of the arguments are.
Yeah. Well, I think the way that Andrew said it was like, my kid's duty is to pass everything that I am down to their kids. And that's when you talk about breaking the cycle and like breaking generational trauma, teachers don't say it in that way, because that would put way more blame on the parents than they probably want to do. But that's essentially what you're doing. Because like I said, if the parents were doing that, it wouldn't be an issue.
I know. Yeah. Number 2 on your list here, moving around there. promote safe firearm storage. Yeah, no arguments there. I know that's something really consistently, like inherently, we talked about laws here. If someone under 18 is using a firearm to attack a school, they're not supposed to have it. It's already
Yeah.
illegal.
Yeah.
Basic
Yeah.
stuff. So I think that really is that community education level of things. Expanding access to mental health resources, always 100% on that as well. And that's something I get really kind of up in arms about. We mentioned like only having to talk about this after, or only really being able to talk about this after a school shooting happens. And that has been getting my goat for years and years. Like the NRA would only ever say like, oh, this is a mental health issue. And I remember one time, I think it was actually after Sandy Hook, like Wayne LaPierre or whatever was saying we need to create a national database of the mentally ill.
Yeah.
And that just made me punch my radio
God.
off, to be honest with you,
Oh
as I
my
was driving.
God.
And it's like, man, like we don't need better mental health resources to stop school shootings. We need better mental health resources because we live in a time that inherently is depressing and anxiety inducing. And
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
people don't have access to that, and people are going to seek coping skills of whatever kinds, whether we offer them healthy ones or not.
Yeah.
Like, it's just a good idea.
School shooters are the fringes of society. They are the
Mhm.
fringes of society that are the result of systemic neglect
Yeah.
and inability to address the needs of an individual, like on the far end of the spectrum. But it is a symptom of a larger problem. So by expanding mental health, you are fixing that larger problem,
Yeah.
which is then going to narrow those fringes to much less extreme situations.
The other important thing is that like not all of these school shooters had a diagnosable mental illness. They were, you could say that someone's generally unwell if they're like mad or lonely enough to kill somebody, but that's not the same thing as saying like this is an illness from the DSM, right?
Yes.
So like, you can make a big database of all the people with all diagnosed mental illnesses, and you still would miss a huge chunk of the people, causing the violence that you're trying to fix.
Well, and also you can't categorize people who are mentally ill on a spectrum of propensity to commit violence
Because
yeah,
actually they're not, actually the vast majority of violence is committed by people who do not have a mental illness, or at least are not diagnosed. And as a population, people diagnosed with mental illnesses are much more peaceful. And, if they're harmful to anybody, they're harmful to themselves.
yes,
Statistically.
statistically.
I'm not I know, I know that everybody here knows this. I'm kind of just, again, screaming to the fucking void.
Even so, like a lot of the times the conversations you have are for the benefit of whoever's hearing them or watching them too, not necessarily to persuade.
Yeah.
But if I'm going back to that that Secret Service threat assessment thing, like they found for like mental health symptoms, that's one of the things where you can always backdate it, because anyone who is dealing with social stress or peer conflict, that's going to be perceived as mental health symptoms, because like baseline depression, that's a third of the country. Baseline anxiety, that's more than a third of the country. History of mental health treatment, we're looking at about half. Again, that's another thing where it's good to have mental health treatment available. It's good to have therapy available. It's good to take care of some of those basic needs so this is less prevalent. And that is something that will affect basically everyone at some point in their life, either personally or through a peer or family member. So quite apart from school shootings, it just needs to be a priority.
That's socialism.
School shootings is what that might have the least effect on, of all the different kinds of violence in this country. But it would have a huge effect on so many other kinds of violence. And I think it's really frustrating that like the people that use like the mental illness cry as a dismissal of like attacks on gun rights, it's so cynical because they don't actually give a shit,
Well, no, I'm gonna push back on you there. I think the majority of the people who say that don't know that that's what they're doing.
I think Wayne LaPierre knows, but
Wayne LaPierre knows. I think the majority of people do believe that it is a mental health problem.
They just couldn't articulate why or how.
Yeah, their action stops at saying that and not actually supporting programs that would help fix that.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And again, like I like how you mentioned again that daily level of interpersonal violence, and something that we see really consistently in, especially if there's any like newsworthy murder suicide, like so frequently it's an ego battle that could have been disengaged way earlier, or like a long running conflict, or refusal to back down, or refusal to accept anything other than I am going to get my way right now. And that escalation is just, it kills people. Like, we know that for a fact.
Yeah.
Which ties into like both mental health and your point number 4 about social emotional learning, because being able to disengage from a conflict is really important. And if you've got armed people who won't disengage, someone's gonna get hurt. And even people who aren't armed, like, we know that as well. Like, fights happen when people can't resolve a conflict or decide this isn't worth it right now.
I know you've probably done this, but have you, Andrew, ever been in an argument? Well, or JB, I mean, have you ever been in an argument when you get to the point with the other person where you're like, what are we even arguing about anymore?
Yeah, for sure.
That is emotional intelligence.
Oh yeah.
Knowing that what you were originally knowing that what you're saying or doing right now is inappropriate and stupid.
Oh yeah.
Not stupid, but like it makes you feel stupid.
Yeah.
That's emotional intelligence, and that's what SEL teaches. Is like, hey, like, what are we doing?
Like, hey, we have finished the instigating argument, and now we are just mad, and we are trying to make each other mad.
Yeah, but nobody wants to be the first one to calm down, because that's going to say that we're wrong, and we don't want to be wrong. But like, if there's a mutual understanding that, hey, like, for the benefit of the situation, we can both come to terms and figure this shit out without yelling at each other, like, that's the stuff that it encourages.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan.
Yeah. Like, step 1 of problem solving is like saying the problem, like defining what the problem actually is. And so often that casts a light on it, where if you're willing to take it seriously, like, oh, that's not what I thought we were arguing about, or that's not what I thought you were mad about. And you can actually have solutions fairly quickly when that comes to it, instead of jumping to a conclusion about what the other person intended.
We have so many arguments. Well, my wife and I have had so many arguments that stemmed from a misinterpretation of the other person's intent. And once you realize that my reaction was a result of my misinterpretation of an action or a thing that you said, that, and not actually the thing that you did, then you can actually talk about, like, okay, well, then your reaction to my reaction seems way more appropriate, considering you thought my reaction was inappropriate from the beginning, because my understanding was incorrect. It's go to therapy. No, SEL in schools too is great.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Give kids the tools so they don't need therapy in their adult years when they're married and trying to figure out their problems.
Honestly, no. Yeah, we do carry so many problems on from childhood as well, which is, again, like, getting to the bigger issues. Like, it's not like school shootings are the only mass shootings, and all of these,
they're the minority.
And like, all violence is something that's generally a result of several failures in a row. And the more we can address like the cause of those failures and give alternate skills, the better. I know, like, flipping through this quickly, like hard school entrances, a lot of that's just schools being locked by default, right?
Yes.
You kind of know that pretty well. It's that extra little road bumps to doing harm. Anti-bullying programs is a huge thing. There's that stereotype that like school shooters are always bullied. And that's not necessarily the case. We know that it's quite a few. And it's that sense that other people have it out for me and the adults aren't doing anything, which is the biggest part of that. If I've been bullied, but I have redress, it's not going to fester in the same way. If I've been bullied and I feel like no one cares, that is more likely to lead to violence of whatever kind that happens to be. And a significant number of folks have previously bullied others as well. It's a little bit less than half, but we know that's also a factor because violence has been extended additionally. That's not like something that I say a lot to students is like, yeah, you're right. Like, we can't fix this. Like, telling a teacher is part of the step, but I always emphasize that doesn't mean we're going to fix it necessarily. It's still important to get help, even if we're not going to be able to just magically change it. And a lot of the present anti-bullying programs are really big on that upstander thing, which is also that social emotional side of things, of how as a student, how as a kid, how as a human being, do I respond when I see bullying happening? It doesn't have to mean confronting or interrupting, but it can mean, hey, I saw what was happening earlier. Are you okay? Do you need some help? Do you want someone to sit with? Right? There's so many things that can look like that are taking care of people in a way that fits whatever your skill set happens to be. And it doesn't have to be, you hit me, I hit you. It can be, you hit me, I get a posse, I get a crew, I hang out with different folks, right?
Yeah.
A lot of possible answers to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
The number 8 thing, that peer-to-peer mentor thing as well too, is really helpful.
It's funny. We have in the fire service, we have this thing called EAP,
Mhm.
which is essentially your coworkers or peers. It's an emotional assistance program where
Yeah.
you have coworkers and your peers, people. It could be people from other departments available to talk to essentially when something happens. And it's used. We joke about it. Something happens to somebody that's like not a big issue. And we're like, oh, do you want EAP? But it's actually been used by tons of people because it's a way for people to talk to others about their problems, but talk to someone at the same level with them who understands, who can empathize and
Yeah.
relate instead of going outside talking to a therapist, because there's a stigma against talking to therapists, talking to
Yeah.
doctors, especially in the gun community, because people are scared
Mhm.
that they're going to get their guns taken away, that they're going to get red flagged. So having things like that in school would be great. I mean, I know, especially as somebody who doesn't have a huge support group of friends, having
Mhm.
someone their age who understands their situation, it would be huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the really key things too is, well, like the more supports you have, the more resilience that builds into the system as well. Like it's not uncommon for me to really intensely work with the kid for a couple of weeks and then just not get to see them for a while because there's so many other things going on because I got hundreds of students to help. If Then that can be tough. Like I'm very aware that there are students for whom that can feel like a betrayal, and that's rough. That's really, really rough. But as in all things, we can't rely on one person to be the solution. That means making sure that there are other folks to check in with, making sure there are other trusted adults, making sure that we have those peer models, and as much as possible as well, making sure that we are there available as a resource to the home, to the parents, the guardians, so that they can do more to be there for their kids or to find people who can. And it needs more than one thing. Like we all need more than one leg to stand on. And if we don't, we need tools to help us stand regardless, or to sit as the case may be.
Yeah, sometimes you just need a break. No, this is definitely one of those. This is a conversation I wish more people in the gun community were having, because it's
Yes.
it's something that benefits everybody, but it's unfortunately tied up in partisan politics. And the majority of the gun community, unfortunately, is not that it's unfortunate they're conservative, because I know, and not all conservatives are assholes or idiots, but
Mhm.
it's unfortunate that the interest in improving things like mental health tend to be a left-leaning ideology. That is not something that I believe is fully embraced by the gun community in the way that, because everybody says they want to improve mental health, but and they say, suicide's a problem, but the vast majority of people, once you start saying, okay, well, this is what we're going to need to do to fix that, and we're going to need federal support, and we're going to need to make this accessible nationwide, and then it starts running people off into the distance, because they
Yeah.
start thinking of the word socialism, or they start thinking of federal overreach, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, and it's a shame, because things like this are only benefit us as gun owners, and benefit us as parents, benefit us as it would have benefited us as kids. We had a great conversation with Project Child Safe when we were
Ooh,
at SHOT Show. I didn't even ask them what their politics were, but I could tell from my conversation with the gentleman that he probably wasn't a gun owner. You pick up on a couple cues here and there that, like, he probably was not a 2A absolutist, I'll
mhm.
say. But we had a great conversation. We had like an 8.5 minute long conversation with him. I say 8.5 minutes, like I was keeping track. There's a timestamp because it was recorded, and we'll release it on a video, about how we have mutually beneficial goals. Their goal is to stop
Yeah.
kids from dying and stop kids from getting unauthorized access to their parents' firearms. Our goal is also that, but by fulfilling that goal, we give anti-gun organizations less, pun intended, ammunition to use against us, to
Yeah.
be used as the emotional leverage to pass more gun control bills. So every gun owner should support stronger mental health programs, because it's going to be a net benefit for everyone. You're
Mhm.
going to get fewer cases of kids getting hurt and being killed, and you're going to have significantly less evidence-backed gun control measures. And for the people listening at home, I put air quotes there because that tends to be a term used, but
for real. And I think that one of the components of that as well is so much of the modern gun space as it exists really is very individualistic. Like, how do you prepare, or maybe how do you prepare to protect your family? And I talk a lot about self-defense, like the two most important parts of self-defense being community and cardio, right? Like, be in shape and then talk to your neighbors, have your friends, like have people to support. Like with a school shooting, I would much rather that someone does not get to the point where they want to do that than I would have the systems in place to keep people safe when it's already happening. I would much, much, much rather not focus so much on like what happens when the grid goes down, and more like, how does my community come together to keep things going? I'd much rather like maybe have my go bag and never use it than I would like focus so much on what's my escape route, right? It gets back to what we talked about a while ago of like, what skills do you need to practice and what things can you do to, more importantly, make sure that you don't need those skills ever.
yeah.
Right. So all of this ground level stuff, this ability to like have culture and society and kids growing up in a place where they have ways to express themselves and they have ways to get help, that helps everybody. Like, no matter how much prepping you do, I hope everyone wants to never have to use most of that stuff except as like a fun hobby or a self-improvement technique. And that's something I really wish could be expressed more. We know what gets clicks, we know is what gets attention, and I think that that individual fantasy of being the protector is pretty strong. But I think the other thing I talk about a lot too is, if you have a society that has that baseline level of everyone has a sandwich and a bed and a roof, then you can enjoy all these martial skills as self-improvement and development in a way that is enjoyable and fun and sustainable and open to more people as well. Because like, imagine if we didn't have to worry about fighting for gun rights in the face of folks having very compelling reasons to not like firearms. Like, imagine if that wasn't the case, you know?
Yeah.
That would be better for everyone and everywhere, top to bottom.
Yeah, it's like, wouldn't it be better to just preclude the bad thing that happens from happening that people use against you? And then you really can say it's not the guns.
Well, it's funny. I'll bring up Kyle Clark again. I've been, people on Twitter really don't like him.
Well, okay. Some conservatives in Denver don't like him.
There's a vocal minority of conservatives from Denver who don't like Kyle Clark. And he turns out he is not a gun control, or he's not a gun rights guy. Like, we knew going into it that we were going to disagree with him on guns, but our conversation wasn't necessarily only about guns. It was to show people that, like, hey, we can disagree about things.
Yeah. Same with the episode with Miriam.
Yes, exactly. And people are all over like, well, he wants to ban guns. He says it's the guns. And I keep trying to tell people, like, he's okay to believe that.
Yeah.
But by fostering open communication with people who believe those things, and to show that we can have a non-hostile conversation with people who believe those things, we can work together. And I would like to have him on again to actually talk about guns and gun safety and gun control. But by fostering that kind of communication and showing that you can have conversations with people you disagree with, and to talk about the root causes of why we can't, or why we believe we can't, you know, you can work on the fact that he's anti-gun later, or you can talk about, you know, why he is, and empathy, and figure out what, like, if there's a middle ground, which, you know, to me, I'm a gun rights absolutist. To me, there is no middle ground. I just don't believe that the evidence shows that it's a gun thing, but I would love to know his opinions and his perspectives, because I respect him as a person. And that's kind of the conversation that we need to be having, is like, we need to get people to start treating each other like people again.
Yeah,
because we can't have these conversations that help people and that objectively help our communities if we don't think everyone in our community deserves the same respect.
Yeah.
That gets into the second, like, 2A for all thing that Carl and Russell over at InRange have been pushing a lot too, is like, it has to mean everyone. Like, if you have to support human rights for all people, otherwise you're just seeking to create a stratified society. We shouldn't be excluding people from firearms ownership, nor from healthcare, nor from shelter, nor from food, nor from access to anything like that, because as soon as we start drawing lines like that, we are creating a lot of problems.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned with the ability to talk to people, like kids do pick up on the national discourse, like regardless of your particular politics. I think it's very undeniable that the last 10 years have seen an incredible coarsening of what public figures are encouraged or permitted to say publicly about this or that person or about other people. And it does filter down. We can only do so much in schools to encourage respect when you can see the most powerful people in the world on TV just slinging insults at others or calling whole groups of people less than human. That's bad for everyone.
Yeah.
It's bad for everyone when it is just a mainstream acceptable discourse to say that immigrants are poisoning the blood of our community.
Yeah.
Ugh. Or that, trans people are not a legitimate category of being. It's bad for everyone when we're writing that off. And there's never, never a single group of some demographic category who is the cause of problems. They're only ever scapegoats.
Correct. Yeah. Unless it's politicians. That was a joke. To be fair, I don't think all politicians are
for legal
bad.
reason. And that's the thing about scapegoats is that, when you run out of one group of scapegoats, you got to find another one.
Yeah.
Plenty of people have found that out the hard way throughout history.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's not enough. It's not enough to be like, I'm comfortable with where I am with expressing my rights, and I'm not going to fight for these other people because I don't like them. It's not enough.
Yeah. Yep. They came for the femboys, but I did not speak up because I was not a femboy.
I was a dick girl.
Anyway,
God, I'm so sorry.
Wait. Yeah, I don't even know what.
It's like I was a porn addict in high school, so I watched a lot of hentai. There's a lot of inappropriate stuff that's stuck in my brain and just comes dislodged every now and then.
That was a great thing for us to end on after saying that. Like we're just like anyway, I don't even. The first thing I thought was, it makes sense, that quote about like they did not come for they came for the communists because I was not a communist, and I was like, everybody says that. What can I say that's different? Let's say this, and then immediately when I said it, I was like, I should have not said that.
Modern culture is reproduction and mimesis, all that stuff. You get very academic about it. You're just doing high level representative whatever.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Not a lot of high level stuff going on in here.
No, and it wasn't like, I shouldn't have said that. Like that's offensive. I shouldn't have said that because that's going to delegitimize everything I just said over the last 2 hours. If that did for some reason, I always find out after the fact that something I said offended somebody, and I'm always learning. Reminds me of my episode with Josh about using a term that I grew up with that I had no idea meant that was a derogatory term for people,
and it was just out there on the internet for everybody.
It was just out there on the internet. Yep. Good stuff.
I guess just to refocus that there again, like that. I mean, that poem is classic, and again, no worries like that. But yeah, it is like you have to defend other people because, again, like the powers. Like we mentioned a lot in like the queer community too. But like, if you are granting people powers to remove firearms from a class of people, they're going to keep on using that. And even if they didn't, like, even if for some reason they decided, okay, we're going to stop at trans people, we're going to stop at immigrants, well, it's still wrong.
Yeah.
Like, they deserve to be protected inherently because
100%.
That is a moral sin and it's a moral injury on everyone to decide to write off a class of people as expendable casualties for
it corrupts everything.
Whatever war you're fighting.
If that's the way that you build your society, it corrupts everything. It changes the way you think. It changes the decisions that you make. It kills empathy. It's just it's not right.
It does.
It is not only not right, it is also unhealthy to do that for your soul.
Correct.
Absolutely.
JB, if you had a piece of advice for people, what would that piece of advice be?
Just like anything
at all.
Quality of life, philosophy, a neat trick that you learn that nobody's talking about.
Guns.
I would just say, like, if you haven't talked to your neighbors, try to talk to your neighbors. Which doesn't necessarily mean knocking on their door with like a full meal or whatever else like that. Like just
howdy neighbor.
Yeah. Who do you share space with that you haven't had an interaction with? And that can include like both next door, apartment next door, but just like people in your community maybe you see more often, but don't really interact with much. Just try talking to them. Try just checking in. Try random, like, hey, how you been doing? How you holding up kind of stuff. It's really, really important.
You want to build these relationships before you have to rely on them for something.
Yeah. And again, like that just benefits everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I know that wasn't your intent, Andrew, but it's not just to say like build a relationship so you can rely on them when you
No,
need it.
no.
It genuinely improves your life to
Yeah.
have relationships with people, because
Yeah.
people are not meant to act as an island. People are not meant to be alone.
Yeah.
And whether or not you believe that the only people you need are your family or whatever, we flourish as humans in communities.
Yes.
We wilter away in the smaller the group.
Also, because
We wilter away. You know what I mean?
if
Wither, wilt.
I know what you mean. If you don't know any of your neighbors, then you're the weird neighbor that they talk about. And you don't want to be in
Yeah.
that position. You want to be the cool weird neighbor that they talk about because everybody knows
Yeah.
you. Because you're gonna be
Yeah.
weird if you listen
Yeah.
to this podcast. You're the weird neighbor either way. But you know,
You'd rather be the fun, weird neighbor that they want to invite over for barbecues, and
it's falling apart. It's coming apart at the seams. But anyways,
Yeah.
it's coming
meet your
apart.
neighbors.
We're breaking
Some
apart.
of them are cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got one bad neighbor. All my other neighbors are cool.
Yeah. We like being available. Like we've had a couple of drive-bys in our block in the last couple of years. So I make sure that our neighbors know, like, hey, we've done stop the bleed training. We got some kits. Like
Yeah.
no questions asked. If you ever need a place to run to, if you're ever like scared or whatever, just no questions asked, just knock on your door. If anyone gets shot or hurt, no questions asked. We'll help you out as best as we can and get you the help you need.
Oh yeah.
And it's important. Like without saying that, how would they ever know that? How would they ever know that they've got a resource next door? How do you share what you have or build steps without people knowing that, you know?
Heck yeah.
Meet your neighbors, talk to your neighbors.
Another banger episode of the A Better Way to a podcast.
Fuck yeah, dude.
Hey, if you haven't checked out our Patreon, check out our Patreon if you want to support the show. We like it, and we like you a lot. And if you like us, then do that, because it helps us keep doing this and pays our internet bills.
And if you don't support the Patreon, we can't pay these guests huge sums of money to appear on our show.
Yeah, JB,
Yeah.
you're
The check already cleared.
Yeah.
oh, sick.
I did not expect 5 million, but I'll take it.
Yeah.
Well, we have very generous supporters, and we're able to do that.
Our
And,
benefactors.
we are funded by George Soros,
That's right.
so we do invest that money and then redistribute it to our communist followers and our guests.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I got called a Marxist this morning. First thing when I woke up, I making a poop on the toilet, checked Twitter, and saw that we were being called a Marxist. Also, on one hand, a Marxist organization, and then on the other, that is clearly fake.
Well, which is it?
I don't know. I mean, well, if it's like what is it? The cat.
Schrodinger's cat.
Schrodinger's Marxist. Do we exist if we're not? Are we Marxist if we don't exist?
Are you Marxist if you're a for-profit company?
I've only counted
Yeah.
2 or 3 AI chatbot tells, so I'm pretty sure neither of you are chatbots.
Okay.
I don't think I am one.
Would you know if you were one?
I don't know. Show me an origami unicorn. I'll see how I respond to it.
I can't.
I'm unable to complete your request.
Yeah.
I mean, nah, bro, that's chill. I love messing with like somebody made so gonna have to send you guys this video. Somebody made this robot with a chat bot in it, but the chat bot is meant to sound like kind of like a Matthew McConaughey from like Surfer Bro type guy,
yeah.
and he's contemplating his existence, and it's super entertaining, and it also is like contemplating why it exists in a semi-depressing way.
Yeah.
I don't think it fully it's all just mimicry. Obviously, it doesn't understand or contemplate, but it still makes for funny material.
Yeah.
Favorite news on that front recently is that you can disable the Google Auto AI summary by just swearing in your search request.
Yeah. Fucking.
And it won't give you the AI summary anymore.
Really? Somebody said you could turn that off in the settings, and I haven't been able to figure out how to do that.
Right. I just switched to DuckDuckGo for everything finally because I got really tired of that. But I like the idea that you can swear at it.
That's cool. Yeah. Yeah. Where fucking local restaurants.
You gotta be careful with that though.
Oh yeah, I guess you do. All right. Yeah, we will let you go, JB. Thank you so much for this. This was a great conversation, and we'll see you. Are we going to see you at Woodland?
No, I probably can't make it out there in the near future because of work schedule.
Balls.
I know. Someday, maybe. We'll see what happens.
All right.
Oh, I do have like 2 plugs if I can.
Do it.
All right. Plug number 1. Your local school board, whatever that happens to be, feel free to go to meetings, get involved, pay attention to candidates, give your support. Like, if there's anything in this episode that really resonated with you, try to make it happen. Like, I don't want to just say this is stuff that needs to be done. I would love it if we could have more parent community, like pressure and impulse, and like, how can I work with you to make this happen, right? Number two, see if there's any volunteer opportunities for local schools. They always like to have people come to read to kids. A lot of schools have extra curriculars or programs where they could use adult mentors. There might be chances to like just hang out with a cool kid who needs another adult in their life from the community, or show them, like, help do job shadowing or anything else like that. And I'd say 3, unrelated to that, feel free to, if you are interested in community networking, organizing, that sort of stuff, the InRange TV Discord server, we've done a lot of work recently to emphasize that in real life organizing and coordinating people. So feel free to hop in over there, in addition to your Patreon dollars for Better Way 2A.
Yeah.
Heck yeah. Do you want to plug your Instagram?
Yeah, it's not really relevant, honestly.
Okay. Well, you make cool patches, so
yeah, I have somewhere buried on my desk of things over here, my embarrassing Doom file. I have my my patches I got from you.
Yeah, I'm gonna be doing a T-shirt next, but as long as if y'all can just like repost that whenever it shows up.
Yeah. Duh.
Oh, no.
Yeah, we love it. Yeah. Sorry, I'm gonna go upstairs with my family. That sounds weird. I just meant like I'm gonna revert to my base instincts as
I will become caveman.
I will become caveman.
I will unga bunga.
JB, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Absolutely,
this is fun.
I'd be happy to come on again if there's ever anything else that kind of changes situationally or whatnot, or
if you just want to hang.
to talk to anyone else who needs that. So
yeah.
But thanks for having me. Thanks for taking the time and going long on this as well. I know that
Thanks for putting up with us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Sweet.